Chapter 11, Section 1, continued. All right, so at the Olympics, we're going to talk about the six main athletic events that occurred at the Olympics. And we will begin by talking about the pancration. Pancration means complete strength or complete victory. It's equivalent today to something like the UFC, right? MMA. It's a mix of boxing and wrestling and kickboxing, except for pancration basically had no rules. The only rules it really had was if you break a rule, there's really a couple of them, but if you break a rule, you're beaten by an official with a stick. But really, all you're not allowed to do is you can't bite and you can't gouge like eyes and ears and stuff like that. The fight will end when either somebody quits or somebody is unable to continue any longer. This was a highly dangerous competition, many injuries, because some people would refuse to give up and you'd have bones break. And there were even people that died in this. Really, though, there was only one sport considered more dangerous than this, which we'll get to eventually, but that was boxing. But this was a very brutal sport. There's accounts of this where you've got legs dangling and such during the fight. So that's the first one we'll mention. The second athletic event we'll mention is wrestling. It's the oldest of the three combat sports. This was a one-on-one contest that your goal was to fall over the other opponent. You wanted their back and shoulders touching the ground. That was a fall. Stretching a man face down on the ground. If you could stretch them out face down on the ground, that was a fall. If you could force a man into a position where he couldn't escape, that was a fall. Because your goal is to get falls over the opponent. 3 falls means you win. 3 falls to win. And there was no clock. So it went till you had a winner. There was another way to win, and that was throwing an opponent out of the ring. You could win by doing that as well. The rules in wrestling was you couldn't strike, hit, or slap. And as long as you don't break that rule, you can break bones, you could gouge eyes. Many would use that second rule, basically anything's fair as long as you don't violate rule 1, to cripple their opponents. Wrestling was considered the safest of the combat sports. The next athletic event we'll mention was boxing. Boxing was considered to be the most physically brutal of these events. A lot of times they would wear thin kind of thongs of leather that was meant just to protect your knuckles as you boxed. Later on, athletes started wearing sharp thongs, which were meant to cut your opponent's skin. Therefore, these boxing matches became very, very bloody contests. Some athletes would become deformed because of punishment that they would take while boxing. The rules for boxing was, again, if you break this rule, you're beaten by the official with a stick. But really, the only big rule was you can't cling to another opponent. You can only hit. And either you're going to win by knocking out the other opponent or your opponent's going to quit. There were no rounds. There was no ring. Judges would keep the boxers together with sticks, and there were no breaks. Basically, you fought till the fight was over. This was the roughest sport of all. The next athletic event you're going to have is running. It is the oldest and most exciting contest at these Olympic Games. There are going to be various running events. One was a stade. This was a straight dash of about 200 meters. You would have a dialos, which was the equivalent of 2 stades. Basically, you'd run down, you'd turn around, go around a post, and run back. You had the dolichos, which was either 7, 12, 20, or 24 stades. So the equivalent of about 1 to 3 miles, depending on how many stades they ran. And then you had the good luck. You try saying it. Hoplitodromos. Okay. And basically in this one, you ran in combat gear just like soldiers did. And your object was obviously to be faster than everybody else in these running events. If there was a tie, neither of you won. If there was a tie, they would take the prize and sacrifice it to the gods. The 5th athletic event is going to be chariot racing. Chariot racing is going to be held in the hippodrome. Chariot racing was usually dominated by the upper class because it was expensive to care for the horses. It was expensive to build a quality chariot. The owners rarely raced themselves. These races were dangerous. There were wrecks and such. Usually they would hire a full-time jockey to race their chariot. You would have 2-horse events and you would have 4-horse events. So a couple different classes here. And the race would consist of several laps turning around 2 turning posts. There's a post on each end. So you go down, you go around that one and come back. And there was no barriers in between the directions. So, as you know, with any kind of racing, you want to be closest to the middle as possible. It's the shortest distance between 2 posts. So there were times where there actually were devastating crashes that would occur as they got too close to each other, passing each other. Your next event was a pentathlon. This is the only event that had multiple sports to it. The pentathlon is going to be made up of 5 different events. So one of those would be running. The next would be long jump. This is a little bit different than our long jump. They would run down and then they would use these stone or metal weights and they would use them to catapult them to increase their momentum. Next, you would have a discus. Sometimes the discus was stone, sometimes it was bronze. It weighed between 12 to 20 pounds. Just to give you an idea, discus today weighs 4.3 pounds. They're throwing one that weighed between 12 and 20 pounds. And a good throw at that time was about 70 feet, which is pretty amazing with that weight of discus. The 4th one was javelin. So you'd have this wood shaft with a metal point at the end, about 6 foot long. And it would have a 1 foot long throwing strap that you would help hold on to. That would help increase the distance. And then the last one involved in pentathlon was going to be wrestling. We don't know with the pentathlon how the events were scored or what order they were in. We just know that these were the events that made up the pentathlon. All right, let's talk about the famous ancient athletes, some of the famous ancient athletes. So let's start with Milo of Croton. Milo of Croton was a wrestler. He was from the Greek colonies in southern Italy. He was a 6-time Olympic victor. He had 5 consecutive wrestling titles. He really resisted retirement. He lost his last Olympics At more than 40 years old, he was still competing. Basically, in that last Olympics, his opponent won basically by avoiding Milo. Milo was a lot older than him, and he basically wore Milo out. Milo of Croton really enjoyed showing off his unrivaled strength. One of his tricks he would do was he would hold a piece of fruit in his hand, and he would challenge people to get the fruit out of his hand, and nobody could. But he also held on to it in a way where the fruit wasn't damaged, so he could literally hold his hand just still, and nobody could peel his hand back or anything. Another one of his things was he stood on a greased iron disc, and he would challenge others to push him off. He at times he would tie a cord around his forehead, and he could actually hold his breath, and his bulging veins could break the cord. One of the other things he would do was he would stand with his right arm at his side with his elbow against him, and he would hold his hand out with his thumb pointed up. And he would challenge anybody to bend his fingers, and nobody could. Nobody could even bend his little finger. Milo of Croton was also excellent in warfare as well. It wasn't just an Olympic athlete. He would enter war battles dressed in his Olympic crowns, dressed like Hercules, and lead his fellow citizens to victory. He's even credited with saving his friend's life. He was meeting with friends one time at a building, and the roof began to collapse. Milo stood and supported the central pillar until everybody escaped, and he escaped himself as well. But Milo does die trying to test his strength. He was walking through the forest one day, and he found an old tree trunk that had wedges in it, where somebody had been trying to split the tree, so pounding these wedges into it. Milo is going to actually place his hands in it and try to just split the wood himself, split the tree himself. When he does this, the wedges fall out, and the trunk closes on his hands and literally traps him there. And he ends up being eaten by wild animals. And so that's how Milo of Croton dies. Theagenes of Thasos. He was a boxer. He was a pancrationist. He was a runner. He became famous at the age of 9. At the age of 9, he's walking home from school one day, and he saw a statue of a god in the market. He decides he likes the statue of the god and tears it down and takes it home. The citizens of Thasos are outraged. Again, he's 9 years old. Are outraged, and there's even some wanting him executed. But what they decide is he just needs to return the statue to its place. After he dies, they actually build a statue of him. And the story goes that there was a guy who had never beaten him before that is going to come and every night start beating up the statue. And one day the statue came loose and fell on the man and killed him. The man's son prosecutes the statue for murder, because the Greeks felt that all murders had to be punished. So their punishment was they took the statue and they dropped it in the ocean. When they did this, a famine actually strikes Thasos, and in their search for how to, what have we done to displease the gods and stuff like that, they go to the oracles, and the oracles say you have to welcome back all exiles. And so the people of Thasos welcomed back everybody they had ever kicked out of Thasos, but still nothing would grow. They go back to the oracles, and the oracles go, you forgot about one. You didn't welcome back Theagenes. And so they sent out some fishermen, they retrieved the statue, and they put it back into place. And people actually began to sacrifice to Theagenes as a healing god. And that story of the guy who beat him, the statue all the time, and the statue fell on him and killed him, here's a little skit about that.
Next! And who might you be?
I'm a boxer, yeah?
Oh, no kidding.
From ancient Greece?
Oh, are you the famous Greek boxer Theagenes of Thassos?
Don't say that name!
All right, keep your beard on. I promise I won't say that name again. The name Theagenes.
Will you stop it, yeah?
Come on then, let's get on with your stupid death. Ooh, does it by any chance involve a certain you-know-who? And by that I mean Theagenes.
Yeah, it does, right? I hated Theagenes of Thassos. I really hated him, yeah? Because he was like the champion boxer. I fought him loads of times, but he always beat me. And he was famous throughout Greece. But had anyone heard of me? No.
And you are...
Exactly my point, yeah? And guess what happens next, right? He dies before I can beat him. And then the people of Thassos build a huge statue of him.
Yes?
So every night, yeah, I creep down with a big stick and I would beat the statue of Theagenes of Thassos, yeah? Like, ha ha, I'm beating him, yeah? I'm beating Theagenes. It made me feel so much better. So anyway, one night, yeah, I crept down with my stick and I beat the statue of Theagenes of Thassos so hard that it fell down on top of me and it killed me.
So, yeah, there's a little skit about that. So, the next athlete we'll talk about is Diagoras of Rhodes. He was a boxer from a rich and noble family, but he was known for being a fair fighter. He didn't fight dirty. He was a gigantic man, they said, size-wise. He won at many games beside the Olympic Games. He didn't just win the Olympics, he won other games as well. There were 3 generations of his family to win Olympic Games. He actually lived to see 2 of his sons with Olympic victories. Two of his grandsons were also boxing champions. So a great boxing family established by him. Next, you're going to have Polydamas of Scotusa. He was a pancratist. He once killed a lion with his bare hands, just like the myth goes that Hercules did. He went into a herd of cattle one time, grabbed the biggest and fiercest bull by one of its hind feet, and he held onto the foot of that bull until the bull escaped from his grasp, but the bull's hoof was still in his hands. He held on so tight. He once stopped a fast-moving chariot as it went by and kept it from moving, so holding back the horses. The Persians had even heard of his feats. Darius sent for Polydamas, and Polydamas fought and won this exhibition match that Darius had set up. It was three of these Persian, what they called immortals. They couldn't lose against Polydamas, and Polydamas won. But his strength couldn't save him forever. One day, him and his friends were relaxing in a cave, and the roof began to collapse. He tries to hold up the roof, and his friends do make it out before it collapses all the way, but he can't escape, and he dies. So one more athlete we'll talk about here. Melancomus of Caria. He was a boxer, known for his handsome beauty and his good looks. They said he had a soul as brave as his body was beautiful. And amazingly, he is undefeated in his boxing career, and he never hit an opponent, and he himself was never hit by an opponent. He would defend himself from being hit, and he would move around till the other opponent was so exhausted that they collapsed or quit. He was known for his endurance. Once in training, he went 2 days holding his arms up in the air above him. And I challenge you to try that even for a little while and see how wearing that is. So there are some examples of some of those famous athletes.